Hello and welcome to this discussion today being hosted by the UK-India Business Council on the risks, challenges and opportunities that British businesses face when doing business in India or with India. Now, India, as we know, has been an exciting story for the last 10 or 15 years. It's one of the fastest growing economies in the world, even though it's slowed down a bit in the last couple of years. The long-term story for India, however, is very positive. It's got a growing middle class, it's got a skilled workforce, and it's got a diversified economy. Now, to talk about the opportunities and the challenges that await British businesses that are looking to do business in India and with India, I have with me today a very distinguished panel of speakers. Let me introduce them to you. On my immediate left is Paul Brooks, who is the Sales Director for Unipart Logistics, and he's also the Chairman for Skills for Logistics. Paul has functional responsibility for the worldwide sales of logistics solutions across all sectors and for a wide range of clients on behalf of Unipart Logistics, which is a division of the Unipart Group. Now, he has worked with clients in the retail, technology, automotive and aerospace sectors in Europe, North America, as well as Asia. Sitting next to Paul, I'd like to welcome Stuart Paver to this discussion. Stuart is the Managing Director for Pavers England. Pavers is a York-based company which was founded in 1971 by Stuart's mother, Catherine, and it is a retailer of branded as well as own brand footwear in the UK and Ireland. And Pavers sells through multiple channels. And last but not the least, I have the pleasure of introducing Kevin McCole. Kevin is the Chief Operating Officer of the UK-India Business Council, which he joined in December 2008 after nearly 2 decades of service in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Immediately before taking up his role at the UKIBC, Kevin spent close to 3 years working as the British Deputy High Commissioner in the Eastern Indian metropolis of Kolkata. In this role, Kevin helped UK businesses win contracts as well as find partners in Eastern India, and he assisted Indian companies that were looking to expand into the UK. Now that we are done with introducing this very eminent panel, I would like to invite each of my speakers to speak a bit about their own experience of doing business in India, and following that, I will have short conversations with each of them before having a more wide-ranging discussion with all of them. So in the first instance, I'd like to welcome Paul to talk about his experience of going into India, expanding in India, and doing business in India.
Thank you very much. Unipart Logistics is part of the Unipart group of companies. We turn over around about £1 billion, and we have about 10,000 people worldwide. It's a company that grew out of British Leyland, actually. It became the Rover Group, and we bought the company in 1987. So it's got a unique culture because at that time we recognised we needed to change how we did business and the way we did business. An old public company that was a private company. So we had to change our leadership style and engage our workforce. So we created a way of engaging the workforce called the Unipart Way. So our methodology of one architecture, one way of working right across the group. And what we've done is evolve that over the last 25 years to the point at which it is today, recognised worldwide for what we call performance through engagement. Unipart have always provided services in the aftermarket logistics and aftermarket for automotive. And our relationship with Jaguar Land Rover started in 1985, and we've actually extended that worldwide. And in 2000, we started rolling that relationship out right across all countries of the world. So we were predominantly in Europe, and we rolled it out across the world. When Tata Motors and Tata Group bought Jaguar Land Rover, we obviously provided a whole range of services which they became visible to them. So in 2009, they asked us to quote for running their new Tata Nano infrastructure in India, which we did. We quoted for that, and we won that business. And we set up a new facility in Sanand, close to Mumbai, recruited a whole new workforce, and we designed the entire facility around lean principles. So that was a very exciting venture, not only for ourselves in order to actually put all of our new thinking into India, but it was allowed us the opportunity to recruit a whole new workforce and establish a new way of working with colleagues in India. So that was interesting. I mean, building factories in India, I'm sure Stuart will come on to talk about, is an interesting challenge. And although it's got easier, setting up facilities has got easier with knowledge of how to do business in India, the delays in recruiting the workforce, getting the paperwork, getting everything established, without Tata there guiding us through that process would have been quite hard, I think, for Unipart on its own going into the Indian market. But that was very successful. The solution went fully live in May 2010. And then in 2011, we were asked to look at the accessories warehouse in Pune, which had already been established, and we took that accessories warehouse over and took on the workforce that existed and trained them up in the Unipart way. I think in both instances, the big challenge for us was to get the workforce working together. India is a very hierarchical country, and the people talk about bureaucracy in India. I mean, clearly there are lots of processes that need to be overcome, and you need to work through process, and we're a very process organisation. However, getting the hierarchy and understanding the culture and the hierarchy was really important in each of the operating facilities. And bringing the management and the workforce more closely together, communicating openly around the issues of continuous improvement and day-to-day. So in the Unipart way, we look at what we did yesterday, what went well and what didn't go quite so well. And we share that with the workforce. And we ask them to suggest areas that we might improve and how we might improve our business performance. And that was not always the easiest thing to do with the workforce in the early days. But once the Indian culture understood exactly what we were asking for, they were very hungry to learn and develop, and realised actually they could take control of the processes and improve them. And the one great thing about India, and I'm sure my colleagues will come and talk about that, is that actually it's a very entrepreneurial country, lots of great ideas, and once they see a great idea, they run with it, work with it, they take ownership for it, and actually they'll go very quickly. So it's then get to a point of actually having to hold people back rather than inspire them to move forward. So that was an interesting time. And during that time, in entering the market, we recognised actually, I mean, the Indian logistics market is very fragmented, has been traditionally very fragmented. The cities all operate independently. Each of the states operate independently. And it's like having a node and then actually delivering out from that node. So what we've got to do as part of that is actually work with the state infrastructure to develop that and actually move forward in actually delivering solutions. And recently we've just been awarded in Bangalore a new warehouse to run for Toyota in India as well, which is very exciting for us. And that's a great new development, taking that learning from Tata into the Toyota organisation as well.
Thanks, Paul. I think that was a fascinating tour through all the exciting aspects of doing business in India, as well as some of the challenges that one inevitably encounters, when you enter the country. But I suppose the challenges that one faces in India are quite similar to the challenges that you might encounter in most developing countries around the world, to one degree or the other. Would you say the experience of going into India was more challenging or harder than what you had anticipated, or were you pleasantly surprised to a degree?
Yes, I think there were some challenges that we were unaware of, but having a strong partner to help certainly assisted us in that. I think the other big growing area at the same time was China for us. And comparing and contrasting doing business in China was very different, but there were a lot of similarities in terms of we had our own way of working, and actually trying to communicate to the workforce on how we wanted people to approach and engage with one another was a slower process than we anticipated. I would say that actually the language barrier in China, whereas in India we were accepted with open arms, there was no language issues, and that really helped. So our team going in was able to upskill and train the workforce and pass over that skill and knowledge, and then leave the workforce really as a part of Unipart very quickly. So actually the barriers weren't as great as we had feared when we entered the market.
Now, you spoke a little bit about sort of language not being that much of an issue, and obviously Britain and India go back a long way, and sort of it's a relationship that straddles centuries. How much of an advantage do you think that gives British businesses when they are assessing opportunities across, say, a range of developing countries or emerging markets?
Yes, I mean certainly the language makes it a lot easier. A lot easier to understand, but we shouldn't always think that actually culturally it's the same. Quite often, if people say yes to you in India, they don't mean yes. They mean they're going to go and do something, but it's actually not what you want them to do. And in terms of building those relationships, really understanding getting an insight into the culture of business is quite important. So having guides such as the UK India Business Council have been very important because they can bring a wider range of knowledge. And it is, as I said before, very different by state. So when you go into a new area, you're dealing with a new local government who do business in a slightly different way. And it's important to understand that.
And the business climate in India, I suppose it's slightly different for different companies, and particularly for companies from different parts of the world that are coming into India. For large multinationals, it poses one set of challenges, and I suppose if you're slightly smaller, it's a slightly different ball game. How was it for you, the business climate that you encountered when you first got in, and the way it has evolved since you've been there?
Yes, I mean, for us, the climate, we entered whilst the UK was entering a recession and India was still growing. So that was very exciting for us and very attractive as a new market. And people accepted us with open arms. I think the evolution that we've seen is that the market has become more cost-focused, which more quickly than we anticipated. We have a sort of a lean and a continuous improvement methodology and philosophy, and that's allowed us to grow perhaps more quickly and started having discussions. So we've always started with international organisations, and we've really started to focus now on Indian multinationals and helping them to improve their cost and service. So that's been quite a big change, but it's a very exciting development for us.
India has many strengths, but it also has many weaknesses or downsides, if you like. And some of them are well known and have been in the headlines for a few years. It's like I mentioned at the outset. It's got a growing middle class. It's got a very educated workforce across a range of industries. People are generally sort of culturally compatible with foreign businesses, but it also has many challenges. A lot of that has to do with its closed economy for a long time, but also it's starting off a fairly low base. Bureaucracy and red tape are a factor that every business encounters in India. So from your point of view, or your organization's point of view, what really have been the main attractions in light of these risks and challenges?
So I think the market, the market for logistics services, which is our primary function, we do consulting and manufacturing as well. The market's about £100 billion in India for logistics services. And so even a small share of that in terms of our market opportunities is huge. The outsourced logistic market for Western organisations is about 5 billion currently and growing at about 10%. So those levels of growth, that presents a huge opportunity. The health and safety culture and lean and continuous improvement and a cost culture means in each of the areas there are opportunities and people are very hungry to learn. And that's the big attraction for us in India because we can actually take capability to new ways of working and it creates a great opportunity for Unipart in India.
I'll have one last question for you, Paul, before I move this conversation forward. Is there anything particularly unique that you're doing with the marketing of your products and services in India, which is closely tied to the nature of the Indian market? And what really are some of your plans going forward?
Yes, so in terms of marketing, India's quite a word of mouth culture. So trade shows and some very focused trade events across each of the states. We attend those, talk to a lot of potential customers. We currently have only about 700 people in our Indian businesses, 4 sites across India. We're just negotiating on another which will double the workforce in India. So we would anticipate we would grow from about 1,500 to 5,000 people over the next 3 years. And we would grow from our existing 4 or 5 sites up to 5 or 10 sites as we acquire those business relationships. So we see, once again, fantastic opportunity, but the marketing is really, we call it a go-see approach. So if you're doing something of very high quality, the Indian organisations love to come and see what you're doing, and they'll see something of high quality, they tend to buy it and move forward on that basis.
Thanks, Paul. That was a really fascinating insight into the joys and woes of doing business in India. And we'll return in a bit to talk more about doing business in India. But for the moment, I will invite Stuart to tell us more about taking a family-owned business into India. And I'm sure the perspective that Stuart will bring to this conversation will be very valuable to a lot of our viewers.
Well, I run a traditional family footwear firm called Pavers, based in Yorkshire, with 100 stores around the UK and Ireland. So India wasn't a natural progression for us. But we launched Pavers England in India just over 4 years ago, and now run around 35 of our own stores and about 150 concessions with all the major department store groups in the country. We operate in nearly every state in the country and across sort of 40, 45 metropolitan areas. I suppose I chose India as the perfect opportunity for Pavers after working in China for a number of years, especially with one company that had grown from being a factory 15 years before to then owning 12,000 shoe shops in China based on the growing middle class and especially the emerging working woman. That changed the whole dynamics of the industry in China. As women got more money, they like to spend it on shoes and handbags, which is great for a retailer. And it just grew a market segment that didn't exist 20 years ago. So it was obvious that 5 years ago that this was the start of what was happening in India. Retailing was changing, people's spending patterns were changing. The younger consumer was willing to spend more cash rather than saving it, as the parents had done. I think the saving rate used to be around 40-45% in India. With youngsters, it's coming down greatly. It was seen, we saw sort of the growth potential was there. The competition was quite low as well. The level of understanding of modern retail within the general Indian retailers was quite low. Very few people were operating multiple sites. They really didn't understand the lean nature of retailing as we've become to accept it in Europe and elsewhere at the moment. So it gave us a big opportunity to start something, experiment, work hard, and really get an advantage. So we did it as a joint venture with an Indian family that we'd worked with in the past, who were all based outside of India. So although we were a joint venture with an Indian family, it was considered a foreign investment. And we based that in Mauritius because of the dual taxation agreement with India, which, when we grow to a certain size and float, hopefully, means that we can get some of the rewards out reasonably tax efficiently. I think that doing it with a family or doing it with another strong partner is absolutely essential, because it's impossible to drop a UK management team into India and expect it to deal with the sort of quagmire of regulations, taxation and all that type of thing that's in India. It's just absolutely impossible for a UK management team to get its head around. when you're trying to deal with senior people, both government and commercial, they just won't pick your phone up unless they see your name on their phone. And they all have 2,000 to 3,000 contacts on their phone, because they'll never answer it unless they know who's calling. So it's important that the people running it really have those contacts on the ground. Our MD over there has over 3,000 contacts, and everybody will pick his calls up between 8 a.m. and 11, 12 p.m. at night. Whereas if I tried calling, they'd just ignore it. So it's really sort of important that you have that local, strong management. Take the culture from the UK, because what we do and what's really attractive to our staff is the fact that we treat them well. We ask them things, we actually interact with them, which you never get with an Indian family business at the moment. Things are changing, but it does evolve. It will take time to evolve. Lastly, I think India is a huge opportunity for us. We don't see anywhere else in the world where we can actually grow to 1,000 stores, perhaps even 5,000 stores in the future. We know that 2 or 3 footwear retailers will do that over the next decade, and it's only a matter of whether we have the skills to be able to do it. It's not that the market doesn't exist. The market will exist in 10 years, and it's just down to us doing it correctly.
Thanks so much, Stuart. There were a few things you said that I'd like to sort of take up in a bit more detail. Now, you mentioned how important it is to go in with local partners, particularly if you're a small or medium-sized British business. I think that's a question probably on the top of the mind for a lot of the people who are tuned in. How did you decide that that was really the best way for you to enter India? And secondly, what were the things that you were looking for in your potential Indian partner?
It's got to be 100% trust in the partner. We'd luckily worked with certain members of the family in the past in India when we were just sourcing from India. So we understood what made them tick, and we trusted them implicitly. And I think that really is the most important factor in anything. Talk to most Indian businesses and they will promise you the earth. You have to decide what they're capable of delivering, and our partners had no experience in retail at all, which was a great thing. So,
are you able to recommend a checklist of things that British businesses should really watch out for when they're trying to find local partners?
I think it's about spending time in India and beginning to understand the people, the processes and everything else before you take that leap. It's no use taking 1 or 2 small trips to Mumbai, staying in a 5-star hotel and then trying to say, I understand India. You've actually got to spend a little bit of time on the ground, meet with a lot of people, understand the whole thing before you do it.
Now, obviously, being from Britain, there are great advantages or just a much more evolved sort of skills and management philosophy for retailers, because India, as probably a lot of people know, is the retail sector is quite fragmented. Organized retail is a fairly new concept in India, and the regulatory environment is quite complicated. Given that scenario, did your background give you any particular competitive advantages going into that kind of a complicated market, or did you have to sort of unlearn a lot of things and then start from scratch?
One of our key mistakes was, in the early days, was trying to go too far too fast, because it becomes very, very expensive trying to service a store that's a 3-hour flight away or a 2-day train journey. When you've only got, say, 1 store in Calcutta, 2 stores in Chennai, a couple of stores in Mumbai, and then 3 in Delhi, it's very, very difficult and very expensive to try and control those all at once. logistics is a nightmare. The number of pieces of paper that you need to move a product from one place to another, even if it's from your warehouse to your store, you need, whether it's one pair or more, 13 pieces of hand-signed documentation, all stamped with a stamp. And if the guy on the state border can't read it, the whole delivery gets held up. So it's very, very difficult. But we learned a lot of lessons from China, where they'd grown and they'd been through this 5-10 years ago.
You were quite emphatic about the opportunity that India presents for a company such as yours. But are there any sort of words of caution as well that you would attach to that opportunity? Are there any particular challenges on the horizon that sort of you're quite worried about?
I wouldn't say worried. The growth rate has come down slightly, but it's still great in comparison to Europe or the West. We're still experiencing like-for-like growth of between 15 and 25% a year. If only we could get that in the UK, it would be absolutely laughing. But no, there's no doubt that the opportunity is there. It's just our skill and our ability to do it.
And I have one last question for you, Stuart, before we move on, but we will have an opportunity to come back to some of these things. Where do you see the competition for you coming from? Because as we know, India's rapidly opening up its retail sector, and both domestic and foreign players are moving in. So where do you see most of your competition coming from? And therefore, how are you preparing for this future that is probably lying in wait for you in India?
We know 3 of the 5 top footwear who they're going to be in the next 10 years. We already know who they're going to be. The question is whether we can be one of them, and then there'll be a couple of other entrants who will spend a lot of money. But there's a lot of people coming into the market that just really don't understand it, and will spend a lot of money and disappear again in 2 or 3 years' time.
Okay, thanks so much, Stuart. We will come back for a broader discussion, but for the moment I will turn to Kevin. Kevin is the Chief Operating Officer of the UKIBC, and Kevin will tell us more about what UKIBC does and how it helps British businesses do business in India.
Okay, thank you. In many ways, we're at a very different point to the 2 stories you've just heard, because the UKIBC is now beginning our expansion into India and setting up some offices there. I'll come on to that in a few moments. So UKIBC, we've been around for about 5.5 years now. Our goal is to encourage and enable more British companies to do more business in and with India. And we've been UK based for those 5.5 years, and we've realised some time ago that to really help British companies we need to extend our services into India. And we're very lucky, last month Lord Green, UK Trade and Investment, gave us a remit to establish some UK-India business centres in India. The first one of which will open in Gurgaon, close to Delhi. It's about 15 minutes from Delhi Airport. In September this year is our target date, and then we'll be opening in Mumbai next year, and then into the other metros thereafter. And from all our discussions with British companies, they tell us, like we've been hearing, great opportunity, very exciting, but particularly SMEs would need a little bit more help to get them there, to get that foothold in the country. So our centres will be providing some infrastructure facilities for people, hot desking, or a permanent base for people. We could have teams of people working on behalf of UK companies to help them do their business development, do their market research, etc. We'll also be doing more delegations and more one-to-one type meetings for British companies, sort of bespoke market visits for companies. And all of that is hugely exciting, and then it comes down to the detail of actually making it happen. And where we are is that we're looking firstly at our, the immediate needs. To have a business centre, you need to have some office premises. So we've identified some office space, and we need to have staff to operate the centres and provide the services. So we've started the recruitment process for a managing director, And a lot of companies have told us, and we've heard it already, that staff are key to succeeding in India. And where a lot of British companies looking at the Indian market and think, right, I get it, staff's key. Right, I get it, we need to have a good office in the right place. But how do we do that? Who helps us to do that? I think at UKIBC we're quite fortunate in that because we know India well, we know people that can help us provide these services. So we have a very good British headhunting firm which has got an office in India who's helping us recruit for the managing director. To build the rest of the team, we know there's some good recruitment companies that operate in that space. So while there are challenges and issues, there's always people around who can help you to overcome those challenges. The next wave of issues that we're dealing with, sort of in parallel to the infrastructure and the staffing, are sort of various elements that we're looking at on a project basis. This is me thinking how we're in the midst of entering India, so how do we do that? And we've broken it down into 6 or 7 different areas. One is building our board of directors in India. We're going to be operating through a wholly owned subsidiary, so we need directors there to govern the organisation. So picking the right board of directors is very important as well. And we've also got to develop this suite of services. It's fine saying what we're going to do, but how do you break that down and how do you actually deliver that? That's very important for us. And then the marketing of those services and the client acquisition is another important element that we need to build in. And all of these things are sequenced to each other. You can't do them in a linear fashion. There's got to be lots of parallel activities going on. We're also having to look very closely at the key relationships in India, with our members, with our friends at UKTI, with the British business groups in India. Again, another great source of support for British companies there. And while we've got the plans for the Gurgaon office ready to go in September, we're already looking at Mumbai, so we're looking at the next piece of real estate that we're going to be moving into. So I think as Stuart said, maybe in the early days, Pavers tried to do too much too soon. I don't think there's any option but to do that. You need to get onto the ground, you need to hit the ground running, and taking the proper advice and doing the right things in the right way, in the right sequence. You can do them, but it will have to be sort of done at a pace because the opportunity can disappear for companies if they don't seize the opportunities now.
Thanks so much, Kevin. I have a few questions for you around some of the things that UKIBC is doing. So these offices that you're opening up in various cities across India. Now, if you are a small or medium-sized British company, wondering which of these cities or centres should I be targeting, for my own operations. What will your advice be to that organisation? What should be the yardstick for choosing Mumbai or Delhi or Chennai versus Bengaluru? Okay,
I think there's a number of issues that a company needs to consider. Firstly, their particular sector. Where are their customers? If you're in the automotive sector, and Paul mentioned a few of them, it's Sanand and Gujarat, or it's Tamil Nadu, or it's Haryana. I think there's a lot of automotive around there as well. So you need to look and see where the relevant clusters are. Companies also need to look at where the talent is, and again, that's quite often linked to the clusters. In Stuart's case, where are the customers? Who's going to buy my product if you're dealing straight to the consumer market? So it's looking at where the market is for you, where the partners are for you. Things we've had to consider, because we will be in each of the metro areas, it's just a question of sequencing them. And something that surprised me in comparing New Delhi / Gurgaon with Mumbai was the price differentials. For office space in Gurgaon, it's about a third of Bandra Kurla complex in the business district in Mumbai. Hiring staff can be up to 40% higher. The staffing costs in Mumbai 40% higher than in the New Delhi area. So if companies are weighing up where the opportunities are, where the cluster is, and how much cash they have and how they prioritise that, then there's some of the factors they would need to weigh up when looking at where in India they should be basing themselves.
UKIBC has been looking at India and sort of for a few years now, and helping British businesses go into India for a few years now. Where would you say the biggest opportunities lie for British manufacturers versus, say, British service providers or services companies operating in the service sector? There must be a few differences and a few things in common, perhaps, if you could just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think you can split the services up first as well. If you're looking at financial or legal services, there's obviously FDI restrictions in those areas. But if you're looking at services that support the manufacturers in India or consumers in India, I'm not saying that just because guys beside me are in those spaces, but there's one British brand management company that I know well. Pre-2008, 100% of their business was here in the UK or Europe. They had some clients in Paris. And now 100% of their business is in India. And they don't have any staff in India. They do their brand consultancy from the London office, selling that, exporting it into India. Looking at the infrastructure side, again, one of Britain's big success stories in India has been Benoy, the architects firm, again, who export their architectural knowledge from the London or their Hong Kong offices into India. So those services, plugging into where India is growing, are doing remarkably well. Where I think the big opportunities are in India are around what you said up at the top. It's the Indian middle class with a disposable income that are increasingly affluent, and they are increasingly brand conscious and value conscious as well. It's not so much the price consciousness. I think that is changing slightly in India. People are more interested in the value of a product, and the number of British retail and consumer brands that are moving into India is impressive. I think there's lots more opportunity there for them too.
I have one last question for you, Kevin, before we open this up. UKIBC has been in India for a few years helping British businesses go in, but British businesses are not the only ones trying to enter India to do business. So from your own experience or your organization's experience and the insights that you've garnered, what would you say really are, just on a broad level, the advantages that British businesses have vis-a-vis their competition from other countries trying to enter India, and what might some of the competitive threats be in that regard as well?
I think, again, it's come up already, but the language, the use of English is a big advantage, but we mustn't overestimate that particular point. There are cultural gaps that business opportunities can slip between if we're not careful. There's a real, I think, an admiration for Britain and for British brands in India. And Stuart hasn't said it himself, but he's got a Union Jack flag on his products in India, and I think that helps them move off the shelves as well. Someone's asked me previously whether does Britain need India more than India needs Britain? I think Britain needs India more, but India wants Britain. India wants British companies to be in India and operating there, and I feel that British companies, if they knew that the sort of the positive welcome they would have, the fact that being British is seen as an advantage, not just Stuart's company, but that brand management company I mentioned as well, the fact that they operate out of London helps them sell. They won't move to India because they think that will make them less attractive to their clients. So I think British companies have got something that some of our international competitors don't have. Where our international competitors have got an advantage, I think a lot of it's down to perception rather than reality. People in India believe that sort of software and technology comes from America, and Britain doesn't do that, which is wrong. And in manufacturing, again, it's Germany. People look to Germany for that. So there's a brand perception in terms of a national brand perception that Indians are drawn towards. So those are some of the hurdles that we need to overcome. And hopefully working with UKTI and with our centres in India, we'll be able to do a bit more campaigning for brand Britain in those areas where our international competitors are perhaps sort of currently regarded more highly than we are.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks for that.